Welcome to In Focus with Ijaz Awan. In another development that will likely increase tensions between Washington and Beijing, two U.S. carrier strike groups launched joint exercises in the South China Sea days after a U.S. warship sailed near Chinese-controlled islands in South China Sea. The Theodore Roosevelt Carrier Strike Group and the Nimitz Carrier Strike Group conducted a multitude of exercises aimed at increasing interoperability between assets as well as command and control capabilities, the U.S. Navy said on Tuesday. This marks the first dual carrier operations in the busy waterway since July 2020. The exercise comes days after China condemned the sailing of a destroyer near the Chinese-controlled Paracel Islands. U.S. insists that USS McCain's sailing was a freedom of navigation operation. Freedom of navigation operation is in quotes. This is how the U.S. described it. Beijing is not impressed. China's foreign ministry responded to the deployment, saying it will take necessary measures to resolutely safeguard national sovereignty and security. The latest exercise also comes just days after a separate mine warfare exercise between the U.S. Navy and Japan's Maritime Self-Defense Force, and this was off the southwestern coast of Japan. To discuss these developments further, I'm joined by Einar Tangen. Mr. Tangen is a political and economic affairs commentator. Dr. Sameer Lalwani, who's Senior Fellow and Director of the South Asia Program at the Stimson Center in Washington, D.C., and Commodore Syed Mohhamad Obaidullah, a former Pakistan Navy officer and a defense and maritime analyst. Before I go any further, I must remind the viewers that, interestingly enough, the Pakistan Navy is hosting an exercise called Aman 21. Aman is for peace, which will be participated in by 45 navies. And this includes China, Russia, and U.S. navies. In fact, Russia would be participating in an exercise with NATO countries' navies after 2011. So that's an interesting aspect of this. Since my opening talked about the sort of, operational maneuvers and naval presence, which is considered hostile, this exercise by Pakistan Navy is conducted in order to have increased cooperation among navies of the world. We'll get to that, but let's first get back to what's happening in South China Sea. And let me begin with Dr. Lalwani here. Dr. Lalwani, your initial impressions.
Well, I think this is a fairly routine set of activities the United States does. Obviously, two carriers operating at the same time was also flexing a little bit of muscle, but the acts of freedom of navigation operations as both signals of assurance to both allies and partners in the region, many of whom who have disputes with China and outstanding or territorial disputes, as well as just simply upholding a principle that I think the United States has been vocalizing for several decades now, but in particular over the last decade, as the South China Sea has come into dispute, the idea of peaceful resolution of territory, the freedom of overflight and navigation. These are sort of the principles ensconced in UNCLOS, which the U.S. Navy has been upholding and enforcing for decades. So I think it's, obviously it comes after some significant activity also from China as well. There has been, Chinese military exercises in the South China Sea, an unusually high level of activity over the airspace in Taiwan. And so I think this is, we're expecting to see this kind of tempo of engagement as both a new administration settles in and China and the United States sort of figure out a new equilibrium perhaps in the region.
Okay. Right. Let's get to Einar Tangen here. Mr. Einar Tangen, your initial impressions. Dr. Lalwani is saying routine exercise. Yes, there is a bit of the muscle flexing, but, essentially freedom of navigation operations. So give me your view of how you look at that phrase, actually, freedom of navigation operations.
Beijing's perspective, freedom of navigation under what legal framework? Now, remember, the U.S. was the one who started all the tussle that ended up in being the UN Convention of Laws in the Seas. And it's going around trying to enforce those. Only one small problem. The U.S. is not a signatory to this particular convention because it does not believe that it should be subject to any body other than its own Congress. So as a result, you have them unilaterally imposing something. It's not something that's often talked about, but saying something that's routine is kind of nonsensical. The second part of this is, what is the threat that China possesses? There's $5.3 trillion worth of goods, much of it Chinese, much of it going to the United States, which has increased its deficit with China. For China to cut it off would simply be killing itself. For Beijing, they're much more concerned that these, quote, command and control efforts are really there as a potential blockade, making Chinese ships go into other sea lanes, or in essence, trying to hold China hostage at some future point. So there's a tremendous amount of distrust between these two nations. Exactly why they're doing it. The U.S. doesn't have a legal framework for what it does, and it doesn't have any kind of rational reason to say that China is threatening these waters.
Right. Just an ancillary point. I'm actually very happy that you talked about UNCLOS, because that's, strangely enough, a rarely known fact. But one of the things that people are talking about is this new Coast Guard law, which empowers the Chinese Coast Guard to take all necessary measures, including the use of weapons, when national sovereignty, sovereign rights, and jurisdiction are being illegally infringed upon by foreign organizations or individuals at sea. Does this mean only when the Chinese vessels are threatened, or is this that China is saying, as some of the critics say, that this is about China positioning itself to actually interdict any vessel that it wants to?
Well, this is the danger, Ijaz. Both sides are ratcheting up the pressure on each other, both trying to show their capabilities. The U.S. Navy is far superior to the Chinese Navy, although in terms of a Coast Guard and any kind of action around China, China could easily overwhelm any kind of forces. But the real issue here is, why China was hopeful that there would be a reprieve from Donald Trump's three-pronged attack, which was political, trade, and security. They thought at least they would that the Biden administration would see the sense in letting things cool off, at least on the security front. Now we're seeing that will not be the case, and that on the political front, the only thing that's going to change is that instead of acting unilaterally, Biden intends to try to get a gang or a mob of like-minded, mostly Anglophile countries to stand behind him. This does not bode well. And I hate to see this constant ratcheting up of each side kind of sleepwalking into a potential conflict.
Right. That's the point when I want to pull in Commodore Obaidullah into this equation. Now, Commodore, you've been a naval officer with a long and illustrious career. Give me a sense of how you would, as a maritime expert, look at this kind of maneuvering in South China Sea.
I think this is more of a symbolic nature to convey the message that the activities which are conveying a message to China from U.S. in the Trump administration will continue to be that way during the Biden administration. Politically speaking, that Joe Biden and his administration have clearly spelled out the relationship which is going to be with China. And mainly there are people who have been guessing that how and when the Trump policy towards China, will it be changed or otherwise? There are three areas of tariff, trade, and military. In fact, Americans consider China their first rival, both competitor as well as coordinator in terms of trade and tariff, and then military competitor in the area. So as far as military confrontation or a military challenge is concerned, the message from political angle is very clear that our policy in this area will remain the same. I would guess that means no war, but also no peace.
So I want to, Commodore, let me interject here. One of the things that I want to ask you, because you're the only former naval officer on this panel, what is the sort of the degree to which one can be worried about miscalculations or accidents when you have this kind of naval activity in the seas?
You see, the aircraft carrier Roosevelt has come after a break of being hit by COVID-19, in which 1,200 people out of 4,500 were hit, and it has come to South China Sea area with a very limited ships on its escort. There are only 2 to 3 ships on its escort, and its deployment over here is not for the purpose of escalating tension, but the presence of USS Nimitz, which is basically stationed in Central Command in the Persian Gulf area in the Middle East, its presence after July 2020, the 2 carriers operating together, I would guess that Nimitz is on its way to either home or elsewhere after completing a tenure here. Nimitz was based basically to look after the withdrawal of forces from Afghanistan, as well as to wait till January when the killing 1-year anniversary of killing of Qasim, the Iranian IRGC commander, activity takes place.
But let me go back to Samir Lalwani here. Dr. Lalwani, I want to invoke another image, frankly. It's like, when you go to an all-boys school, there's a certain way in which territory is marked. And it's not just about, pouncing on the other person, but the manner in which one moves about, approaches, all of these essentially are threatening, very Pinterest in some ways. Do you think, is that something happening in South China Sea between the U.S. and China?
Okay, let me take that on board and a couple other things as well. So first on this territorial question, I don't think this is just a jockeying for position. I think the United States has consistently talked about peaceful resolution of disputes, and for a long time it's promoted the idea that China and the ASEAN countries should come to an agreement on the code of conduct in the South China Sea. And from all indications, the party stalling this is China. So I don't think this is about U.S. claims on territory. It's actually about supporting peaceful resolution of a common that, as Mr. Tangen pointed out, is sort of home to $5.3 trillion in maritime traffic. And so this is a vital part of the world economy. And the United States doesn't want to see conflict in the region, and so is exercising there to sort of ensure that, both reassure partners, but also to ensure, again, freedom of navigation, overflight, safe passage. I just want to pick up on a couple of the points that were said earlier, about the Biden administration's approach to this. So a few sort of fact checks. I think the National Security Advisor and others have pointed out that their objective is not to be confrontational with China, but to be competitive. But in this instance, there are threats that have emanated from China towards both U.S. allies and partners. First of all, this whole thing started with excessive maritime claims, or the 9-dash line throughout the South China Sea, with China claiming a whole host of what the rest of the world regards as either other countries' territory or public commons, global commons. The second is, the Chinese economic coercion leveraged against again, U.S. allies and partners in the region, South Korea, Australia, and then routine confrontations, oftentimes with their Coast Guard, with a number of naval and fishing vessels in the South China Sea of Indonesia, Malaysia, Vietnam, Philippines. So when a lot of these other countries are looking at what the United States is doing, they are reassured rather than concerned about U.S. military presence. And again, these phone-ups they're not something that just got started in the Trump administration. I admit that there was a very cantankerous and confrontational way in which the Trump administration went about these things. But this was continued from the Obama administration, which really stepped these up around 2014, 2015, as China started building these maritime features in the South China Sea. I'll say that I also am concerned about the risk of accidents and escalation, but from a particularly different source. From what I hear from the U.S. Navy, U.S.-China naval engagements in the South China Sea are fairly professional. Where things are unprofessional is with Chinese naval and Coast Guard engagements with other countries in the region, with other smaller countries in the region. This speaks to Chinese intimidation and bullying of smaller countries in the region. So part of the U.S. objective is to be able to stand up for them and to reassure them so that there can be personal engagements amongst all maritime vessels and navies in the region.
Right. That's an interesting point. I'll take that to Mr. Tangen. But before that, according to a report, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken told a senior Chinese official that the U.S. would hold Beijing, and I quote from the statement as reported, accountable for its efforts to threaten stability in the Indo-Pacific, including across the Taiwan Strait, and its undermining of the rules-based international system, unquote. That seems like tough words. So, Mr. Tangen, so one of the points that Dr. Lalwani is making is that the U.S.-China naval encounters or dealings are fairly professional, but Chinese Coast Guard and other vessels are somewhat threatening towards other, the vessels of other littoral states. So would you want to say something about that?
Inevitably, as one power grows like China, it starts to brush up against other countries and powers. And there's always a sense of fear that what is this new, larger player on the block going to do? Washington has used that fear quite dramatically to push a whole list of issues and vilify China. The fact is, it's not as if this is just China versus the rest of the world. If you start looking at the South China Seas, there are multiple claims by multiple claimants other than China to different areas of territory. So at this point, it's very, very difficult to figure out. What happened initially is that there was an agreement with Vietnam. That did not work out. Vietnam, in essence, seized some islands and basically said, listen, we have it, we control it. And this kind of atmosphere seems to be what's going on today. You have the Philippines who rammed an old ship onto a shoal and in essence said, look, this is ours, we're staying here. So people are playing games as they try to do it, but ultimately, this is not an area where the U.S. is to play the world's policeman. As I said, they have no legal framework to do this. They're not doing it by treaty with these countries, and they're not doing it under the UN Convention of Laws of the Sea. It is a unilateral move, which is projecting U.S. power, in essence, in Beijing's view, to contain China. So at this point, I believe the final solution is going to have to be something that is arrived at by ASEAN nations and China, cooperating and negotiating in good faith. Frankly, I think the best solution would be for China and the rest of these countries to acknowledge that the South China Seas belongs to South China nations, that no navigation will ever be impeded, and that if there is development, shall be shared according to a formula that all agree. This would be the best way and would put both India and the United States out of an area where they do not belong.
Right. So now that you mentioned this, tell what exactly is happening, because I believe there is a negotiation framework between China and the ASEAN countries over the sharing of resources in South China Sea. Where exactly does that dialogue stand?
Well, it's still under negotiation. I mean, remember, they just signed the RCEP, which is, in essence, involving all of these nations. This is a first step. Treaties require trust building. And in the current environment where the U.S. is doing everything it possibly can to engender distrust of China, they are struggling to say, look, first, let's trade. Second, let's figure out our territorial disputes. They've tried this with India, not to much avail. And they're trying it in the South China Seas. And right now, it looks like they have a good chance of doing it, as long as you don't have these other busybodies who are not part of Southeast the South China Seas, trying to stick their foot in for their own geopolitical purposes.
Right. Dr. Lalwani, any final thoughts, especially because Commodore Obaidullah said that given the assets that Nimitz is carrying and the escorts, is not really a threatening force, from a military point of view, but more of a political signaling. So from that perspective, are you expecting any sort of tweaking of the Trumpian policy by this administration in terms of cooling off?
Certainly. I think, as I said earlier, the approach that, as I understand the Biden administration intends to take is, again, one of competitive cooperation. There'll be times when there's going to be opportunities for cooperation with all parties, including China. But the U.S., I think, is still taking very seriously this idea of competition. And much of that is actually much more domestic. It's about orienting our institutions and infrastructure and economic policies to posture for, a more competitive environment in the 21st century. And so it's not going to be this pugnacious kind of confrontation at every turn with a lot of heated rhetoric. It probably will be a lot quieter, but backed by a lot more heft politically, economically, militarily, and a lot more thought. So I think that's just sort of the general approach that I sense from the Biden administration. And this is public knowledge. It's coming out of a host of analysts and scholars and former practitioners who've been writing about these ideas for the last 4 years are now all coming into government in various positions in the defense and foreign policy community. And so I think we'll start to see those ideas be infused into policy. I just want to make one point about the South China Sea, the idea that the United States is a busybody sticking its nose in. The United States has been there for over 70 years. It has 3 major treaties with treaty partners that invite U.S. forces to be present there: Philippines, Japan, Australia. It has naval forces stationed from time to time in Singapore. There are a host of Southeast Asian nations that welcome U.S. port calls, do military exercises with them. We were encouraged and welcomed and frankly sought by a lot of partners in South China Sea. It's the idea that this is that this maritime commons is somehow owned by one particular set of countries, I think is false. As we talked about earlier, this is sort of a central node of global trade. It's the heartbeat of international commerce, and so the United States has a vested interest in upholding that and ensuring that for all nations.
Right. Thank you so much. That was Dr. Lalwani speaking with us. Commodore Obaidullah, let's go back to something that I talked about. There's this whole issue of naval rivalry, geopolitical rivalries. But I mentioned what the Pakistan Navy is doing, and it's been doing this since 2007. The Aman, the peace exercises, the cooperative framework, getting best practices from every other navy, and doing anti-piracy and other operations. So because this exercise will be kicking off, give us a sense of how significant this Aman 21 is, and how different it is from the Malabar exercises that the Indian Navy started doing bilaterally with the United States. Then in 2015, Japan joined as a permanent member, and last November 2020, Australia also. And so this is the Quad. So Quad had these exercises. So give us a sense of how Aman is different from Malabar.
I will do that. Let me allow me to spend only 2 minutes to talk about still on South China Sea.
Right.
All said and done, both sides have their views and their reasoning for being there and being threatened by each other for the closure of Malacca Strait, which is a very important waterway to the entire world. And but I think at the end of the day, South China Sea situation will never get to an extent to start a war by China or by US. If there is something which is really very sensitive and can cause a beginning of war by design, it will be Taiwan. Because Obama administration has always favored Taiwan to very aggressively supporting them. And again, now Democrats under Biden will do that. So that's my take on it. Militarily, of course, the muscle flexing by both China as well as the US is going on. As far as Aman exercises are concerned and Malabar exercises, Aman exercises started in 2007, and this is the 7th of the series, and it's going to happen in a few days' time. And that will be joined with an international maritime conference on 13th, 14th, and 15th of February. And these exercises take place every 2 years. When it started, it had 25 countries, and now today it will have a participation by 45 countries. Why this Pakistan Navy has been successful in the maritime diplomacy? Because a common good for all the world and all those who are interested in the peace and tranquility in the area and overall in the world have understood the objective that these being for creating an environment of peace, safety, and safe navigation have joined in. Like you mentioned, the Russians and the American and Chinese and UK and France and Italy and many others, those who could not see eye to eye, they have sort of, after 11 years, NATO and non-NATO are meeting together on one platform. As far as Malabar exercises are concerned, to 1992, it started with only India and the US. And then, of course, as you said, 2015, Japan, and 2020, Australia. The 4 Quad, with a focus of containing China, is aiming to contain China through simulated exercises, or I should say war games. On one hand, there are peaceful anti-piracy, anti-smuggling, safe navigation, interoperability being done by Pakistan, and on the other hand, simulated war games are being done, and they have been only able to sort of attract to the rest of the world only 4 countries. And I only guess that during Biden tenure, Australia will sort of wriggle out like it did in 2007, be due to geoeconomic relationship between China and Australia. So having said all this, I think we wish a very fruitful, diplomatically really beneficial trade and safe navigation angle, achieving our objective. Aman is going to create an environment of peace in the region.
Right. Thank you. That was Commodore Syed Mohammad Obaidullah speaking with us. Thank you also to Mr. Einar Tangen for his insights. We shall take a short break and return to discuss reports about a tiff between 2 senior generals of Indian Army. Stay with us. Welcome back to In Focus. The Indian Army is finalizing a court of inquiry into a bitter tussle between 2 top generals of the Jaipur-based Southwestern Command. According to Indian media reports, this is an unprecedented development in recent history of the 1.3 million strong army. A COI at that level of command is very rare. The Southwestern Command is headed by Lieutenant General Alok Clare, an Armored Corps officer, and his second-in-command, or Chief of Staff of Southwestern Command, Lieutenant General K.K. Repswal. and Repswal is from the Corps of Engineers. The Southwestern Command has a strength of about 130,000 troops and is meant for operations against Pakistan in the Rajasthan and Punjab areas. As per reports, the two officers withdrew their complaints on Tuesday, but the court of inquiry will be finalized and the Indian Army chief will take the final decision as per the findings of the COI. To discuss this further, I am joined from General Naeem Khalid Lodhi, a former Commander, Corps of Engineers and former Defense Secretary, and Major General Ijaz Awan, a former General Officer of Pakistan Army and former High Commissioner of Pakistan to Brunei Darussalam. Thank you to both panelists. Before I begin with General Lodhi, just a quick recap. Now, one of the things about the COI and the complaints was allegations, countercharges. They range from administrative lapses and major functional troubles to misuse of authority. Now, we are talking about two officers who are both lieutenant generals, one commanding Southwestern Command and the other the COS of Southwestern Command. So let's get to General Lodhi here. General Lodhi, how does this work? Do you find this, is this something that's normal, can happen, happens, also happens perhaps in Pakistan Army, or is this something which is surprising?
It is surprising in a way that in any disciplined force, such events do not occur normally. But there's a great anomaly in the organizational hierarchy of Indian Army. As you said yourself, their command commander is a lieutenant general. Their chief of staff is again a lieutenant general. And he has 2 or 3 corps under his command. They are all commanded by a lieutenant general. So, Army is a strictly hierarchical organization. And unless the levels of command, the level of command are according to the level of ranks, it doesn't work. Because there is no such thing in Pakistan Army, so such things do not happen. Of course, once you have equal commanders, 3 stars, one commanding one formation, the other commanding other formation, they can have difference of opinion. But we have a conflict resolution mechanism very well laid out in our armed forces, and somebody decides immediately. So that is not a conflict. In other words, you can say a difference of ideas about how to plan a thing or how to carry out an operation. But in this case, 5 officers of the same rank having different levels of command, different, you can say status in the hierarchy is a very strange thing. And it doesn't happen. No, most of the armies will not be having it. I'm aware of all the known armies that they do not have this sort of system. Either if you want to have a command, as we have CENTCOM and Pacific Command and all, then they have a 4-star. And the 3 stars are under him, and then 2-star and like that. But having 4, 5, 3 stars at one level and actually rank-wise at one level and hierarchy-wise at different levels, it is likely to create such things. Because in armed forces, the senior they call is an engineer, which means that whatever he says, that is the last word. And we have a very good system in our army where you get all the inputs, but once the senior decides, then there are no ifs and buts. So I think this had to happen. This has happened before also. This is not the first time that this thing has come up in the Indian Army. This has happened a number of times. Even the officers who were superseded and somebody else was made chief, you know yourself, then somebody went to the court and all these things. So not new as far as the Indian Army is concerned, and still they have not been able to put it right. I'm surprised at that.
Right. Now, that's a very, very important point, and I'm very happy that you made that point about having, so many officers of the same rank. Perhaps, course-wise might be junior, but still, when you are different generals at different levels of command within one theater, then that's going to create problems. But let me pull in Major General Awan here. Major General Awan, your initial impressions of this particular incident. As General Lodhi said, this is not the first time this has happened in the Indian Army, and he also pointed out the structural anomalies, the organizational anomalies that might be behind this kind of tussle. So what are your impressions?
Thank you. I think General Lodhi has aptly put it there, because with the same rank, people in the same rank having different levels of command are working together, there can be a difference of opinion, and as it has surfaced now, there could be some misunderstanding and difference of opinion. I think it needs to be sorted out, but the essence is that when same level, of, same seniority, officers of the same seniority, particularly same rank, with a different level of command are working together, such like misunderstandings and such like difference of opinion, or a tiff, as you put it, can occur. But I think it is doable. They would resolve it. It's not, I would say, it's not an event which is going to have a make or break effect in the Indian Army. It's a very large army, very professional army, and they'll be able to sort it out and they'll even it out. It's not something that we can capitalize on, or it does not indicate a very major weakness in the Indian structure of command. Yes, there is some misunderstanding and probably they'll be able to iron it out.
Right. One other report also suggests that the COS of Southwestern Command, Lieutenant General Repswal, has been transferred to the Eastern Command in Kolkata. Interestingly, the rift between the two generals had been festering for long, with both making representations and complaining about each other's conduct to the Army Chief. This happened last year. And then the Indian Army Chief, General Naravane, deputed then Vice Chief Lieutenant General S.K. Saini, who is now since retired, to inquire into the matter. The COI was then ordered by General Naravane after it was found that certain serious issues raised by the two officers required greater scrutiny. So, and this, everything that I have placed before you is from the Indian media. General Lodhi, as General Awan said, this is not something that's going to break up the Indian Army. Of course, it's a professional army. But it is an embarrassing episode. And, you know, would you want to say something about the embarrassment that this causes?
Not only embarrassment. Embarrassment, of course, it is. That is so obvious. It is also reflective of some deep-seated problems in the Indian Army. And normally, we have read, in the past also we have seen, once we read the history, that whenever the morale of an army is low and the armed forces are not very popular in the society, such things do happen. Because a very high morale army normally would have good discipline also, and they can always absorb such small hiccups very easily. But because these things are coming up and coming out, so it clearly, I think, indicates, in my opinion, the morale problem, the training problem, the administrative problem, and of course, a little bit of, I think, some sort of, misusing the authority or something, such like things are happening quite obviously. So once such senior officers, they start quarreling with each other, be sure that there is some other problem also, other than what I indicated, that the hierarchy and all that. So I think whatever beating they got from China and then whatever happened to them with Pakistan and their inability to control the movement which is going on in occupied Kashmir, and also whatever is happening in the mainland India, all these things are also reflective how the armed forces are being treated by the nation itself, and what tensions must be there within the armed forces. So I would say that there are other factors also, other than the organizational factors, which are reflective through such incidents.
Right. General Awan, this kind of thing, having difference of opinion, this can be anywhere. I mean, within one family, one can have difference of opinion. Similarly, in Pakistan Army also, then at times there are operational pressures. Someone might say that this particular operation plan is better than another operational plan, or might think that one administrative measure is better than another. So when that happens in Pakistan Army, how is that resolved? Are there any, and I'm asking this not just with reference to the hierarchy or the rank structure, but also in terms of, are there any rules of business? Is this part of leadership? Is this something that the commander has to tackle on his feet?
When we are trying to relate it to the Pakistan Army, Well, it's very simple. Whenever there is a difference of opinion on plans, as you said, because Army at one time is dealing with number of issues, administrative, training, and operationals, as we categorize them mainly. Whenever there is a training issue or an operational issue, we do carry out exercises, and when there is a plan, officially a plan, operational plan is presented, the officer who is presenting his plan, he gives complete justification or rationale for his plan, and the others have got the right to question his validity of the plan or efficacy of the plan and how is it going to fare in the given environment. Well,
Correct.
There are no emotional attachments to the operational plan. People are open to logic, and then the senior most competent officer present there, whether it's Corps Commander, under whom there are 3 major generals and at times 4, if they are trying to present a plan, they have the right to question it, and it is always appreciated that the others, they try to find out the weaknesses in the given plan to arrive at a better plan. But then the Corps Commander is the final authority who gives an approval, and when it is at the Army level, certainly the final approval is given by the Chief of Army Staff. I remember one incident when I was operating in Sawat, and we were planning operations, and there were 3-pronged operation being launched, and the 4th prong was of the SSG. The plans were presented, General Lodhi being my instructor, and at that time he was in GHQ, he was also there. Every general was asked to present his plan, and it was presented in the presence of CGS, DGMO, and General Ashfaq Parvez Kayani. And after 7 days of debate, thorough debate, finally the approval was given by the Chief of Army Staff. The plans were executed, and we saw the result in 5 days. 5 weeks, we got over with the massive problem of Malakand division, this extremism or terrorism which was spread over 8 districts of Malakand. We overcame it in 5 days. So such like things are always appreciated. The senior command puts the final word, and then there is no bickering. People get on their job and they do it. But in this particular case that we are discussing, in case of India, since I do not know whether the problem is of administrative origin, administrative nature, operational training, financial matters, embezzlements, or moral issue. So if we had known what was the problem actually, which is between the 2 senior officers and the 3rd one is trying to resolve, we would have been able to comment in a better way or analyze it in a better way. But moral effect, of course, is there. In Pakistan Army, let me put it on record, and the whole nation knows, we fought terrorism for 19 long years. There was not a single case of suicide from ranks to the officers. Whereas in Indian Army, in the last decade, there have been more than 1,200 cases of suicide from different ranks, and even subordinates shot their officers in Kashmir. So that morale problem in the Indian Army is, of course, very pronounced, which speaks of a weak discipline and stress on the subordinates as well as on the command. And there I fully agree with General Khalid, Naeem, Lodhi, that such like problem could occur in Indian Army, which would, of course, would be having a very devastating effect on the performance of the Indian Army.
Right. Actually, the media reports in India suggest that there have been allegations, countercharges, and they range from administrative lapses and major functional troubles to misuse of authority. So this is where, but there's also a possibility of personality clash. But I'm happy, General Awan, that you mentioned SWAT operation, because I remember in the heat and din of battle, I interviewed you there. But before I wrap up, let me go back to General Lodhi here. General Lodhi, any final thoughts with reference to what General Awan has said?
I would only like to say that whatever comes, at the front and whatever is visible may not be the actual reason of whatever is going on between these 2 officers. There can be a difference in operational thought. There can be a difference in the training methodology or something else, or maybe at times even a bad report given by the senior officer, or some groups working against other groups. Such like things happen in bad disciplined forces. They might be, narrating this, the reason for the consumption of the public, but the actual reason, underlying reason may be different. And as I said, that there are so many pulls and pushes and tensions in Indian Army nowadays that anything can happen. It could be operational difference or training methodology or whatever. And I think we should thank our stars that although both the army, the Indian Army and the Pakistan Army, they have their roots in the British forces, but the difference is because of, I think, the faith that the Pakistan Army carries with it. But of course, the successes and the failures, they also impact very hugely on the psyche of armed forces. So we are grateful to Allah, we are grateful to the public of Pakistan, the people of Pakistan who have been standing all along with us, that these are the successes of Pakistan Army that keeps our morale high, and in their case, the failures are making all these things happen.
Thank you. That was Lieutenant General Naeem Khalid Lodhi. Thank you also to Major General Ijaz Awan for his insights. This is all from In Focus this week. We shall see you next Monday at the same time. Keep following our latest updates on social media at indus.news. Good night and goodbye.